This is Dolynny TV, ladies and gentlemen. The Stanley Cup playoffs are over. It's a St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup victory, the first of its kind in the 51-year history of the St. Louis Blues. Of course, what do you say as an Oilers fan? I guess you say congratulations, but you're saying congratulations based on one thing: the two former players who were on that cup-winning team that just moments ago finished the game in Game 7 against the Boston Bruins, a 4-1 victory to win said Stanley Cup. Those two players, you may ask, who are they? Why are they significant? What the heck's going on here? Well, two former Oilers, as I said, one in David Perron and one in Patrick Maroon. Two guys, David Perron probably a little bit more over his career offensive than said Patrick Maroon. However, things are twofold here for the Edmonton Oilers and the St. Louis Blues, two players that just won the Stanley Cup. You look at David Perron. When was he an Oiler? We'll start with him. He's an easy case to wrap up. 13-14, 14-15. Where'd he come from? He came from the St. Louis Blues. So it all comes around. He's actually done 3 tours of duty in St. Louis before going to Vegas after the second time, and then coming back after the Vegas season, almost winning the Stanley Cup there, and now finally capping it off with a Stanley Cup win in St. Louis. Like I said, the first one for the St. Louis Blues. Now, David Perron, a guy who at times took heat in Edmonton, wasn't always the most popular, right? That whole team, those years, really struggled. He ended up traded halfway through the 14-15 season. His minuses are career worst as an Edmonton Oilers, minus 16 the first year, minus 17 the second year. We don't need to go over this. This is celebration time. So again, hats off to David Perron, who at 31 years old, turning 31 just pretty much 2 weeks ago during the Stanley Cup playoffs, wins his Stanley Cup right there. And then, well, guys, this is where it gets really fun. You get Patrick Maroon. David Perron is what he is. That's a story all to itself. But Patrick Maroon, guys, this is the story that will get me every single time when it comes to hockey. The guy that is here not for himself but for his family. He's here because it's a job. He's here because it's something he's good at and he can make a living doing, and that in itself is Patrick Maroon all the way. Patrick Maroon came to the Oilers after finishing 15-16 after getting traded from the Ducks in 15-16. Holy crap, you guys think I would know what's up. It's a little late, been trying to keep up with the Blues-Bruins game. So, he comes over in 15-16, pretty much point per game. And then 16-17, guys, this is where it got so fun for Oilers fans. 27 goals out of Patrick Maroon. The line that was Maroon, McDavid, and Draisaitl. Just one of the most epic combinations we have had in forever, right? You got to think back all the way to that 05-06 Cup run since we had such an epic combination. And that was what it was down the stretch into the playoffs. 8 points in 13 games for us. But then, well, he goes on to play 17-18. However, 17-18, we start to see the cracks in the foundation that was Patrick Maroon on the Oilers, right? We all know where it went. His son, and how much he was missing his son, who was back home in St. Louis. All he wanted was to be with his son back in St. Louis. Ultimately, what that led to is the Oilers knew he wasn't going to re-sign with them. He got traded to the New Jersey Devils for, I believe it was a 3rd round pick, and that was the end of the era for Patrick Maroon in an Edmonton Oilers jersey. Then, well, this is where it gets really fun, because Patrick Maroon has a chance to get paid. A guy who, for all intents and purposes, made some great milestones in his career, put up 43 points in, bang, in a whole whopping 74 games in 17-18. Guys, this was a great year for Patrick Maroon, a new career high in points following a career high in points in 16-17. And you go out and you see him do that, and he goes and says, well, you know what? It doesn't matter. I don't want to sign for the money. I don't want to sign the big contract that will keep me somewhere else. I want to go home. I want to be where my son is. And Patrick Maroon goes home to St. Louis on what, by all intents and purposes, was a big pay cut for what he should have gotten on the open market July 1st. And he goes home. And you know the season the Blues had. They started as the worst team in the NHL. January 2nd, I believe, is the date. They were 31st in the NHL. Believe it or not, at one point in 2019, the St. Louis Blues were a worse team standing-wise than the Edmonton Oilers. And then everything changes. And the run that I tried to say the Oilers needed to go on happened in St. Louis. And guess what? You have round 1 goes according to plan. Round 2 according to plan. Round 3 according to plan. And you don't have a Stanley Cup victory unless the Stanley Cup final goes according to plan. So the St. Louis Blues, in all this, take home a Stanley Cup, but more importantly, a guy that, I absolutely loved Patrick Maroon. There's no way around me saying I loved Patrick Maroon without me saying I loved Patrick Maroon as an Edmonton Oiler. This guy was and is heart and soul when he plays on the ice. He'll fight, he'll check, he'll do everything that maybe Milan Lucic is supposed to do while putting up offensive numbers. And you look at the numbers he had in St. Louis this year, a little bit of a diminished role compared to what he was in Edmonton. However, 28 points, 74 games played, 10 goals, 18 assists, still those big penalty minutes, getting the job done, 64 penalty minutes, only a -3, and then in the playoffs, 7 points, 25 games played. Let me double check that I'm not missing any points in the Stanley Cup Final Game 7, and we'll get to it, Stanley Cup Final Game 7. Let's go right here, and let's go double check this, guys. See, I didn't check this before going live. David Perron had an assist in the cup-winning game, and right there, Patrick Maroon, no points, wearing number 7, but he finishes with 25 games played, 7 points. You know what? You can sit here and say he wasn't that instrumental in the Blues winning the Stanley Cup. He's just a cog in the wheel that got the team going. But in the Stanley Cup playoffs, the grind that is the Stanley Cup playoffs, you don't win the Stanley Cup unless you have those cogs in the wheel, getting the job done, going out there, turning the ice every single shift. And that is exactly why I am such a big fan of Patrick Maroon. But as an NHL fan, as an Oilers fan, watching a former player play in the Stanley Cup final, the story of his son going back to St. Louis to be with his family, taking the pay cut, is absolutely one that is so admirable. And then to top it off, going from being the worst NHL team on January 2nd to going out there on June 12th, 2019, and winning the Stanley Cup as part of the St. Louis Blues, where again, you know what, Patrick Maroon, a St. Louis native, like I said, does something for the first time in the history of the franchise and lifts the Stanley Cup over a team they may have been able to lift the Stanley Cup over way back when in the Bruins. And now it's done, history cemented, and Patrick Maroon, my hat is off to you. David Perron, my hat is off to you as well. Congratulations on the 2019 Stanley Cup victory. Guys, let's keep the comments as positive as we can. I want to hear absolutely everything you have to say on the St. Louis Blues winning the Stanley Cup. Let me know in the comments section down below. Guys, I'm Tyson, this is Dolynny TV. As always, I'll catch you in the next one. It is full on off-season mode from here. I am up on out of here.